Welcome back to the deep dive. If you've been following this journey with us, you know that our previous deep dives focused heavily on the individuals, the triumphs, the conflicts, the intimate, often dramatic stories of the people who shaped this family history. We've tracked their political alignments, their marriages, and, well, their shifting fortunes. But today, we zoom out. We are changing our lens entirely to focus on the places. This deep dive is a virtual tour of South Carolina, exploring the landscape itself. The swamps, the rivers, the pinelands, where this history actually unfolded. Our mission today is to understand how the land dictated survival, generated wealth, and ultimately, solidified the family's status over centuries.
That's absolutely right. The core idea guiding this exploration is that history isn't just recorded in birth and death dates or written in old letters. It is quite literally written onto the map itself. The geography of South Carolina is, well, an active participant in this story. We are going to trace the specific journey, the migration patterns that mark the ascent of the family from, say, the initial struggles in the coastal swamps up through the prosperous Midlands.
Okay. To guide us, we've relied heavily on foundational texts that catalog geographic history, particularly journals like Names in South Carolina. This material lets us move past broad historical generalizations and really connect specific family names to the physical geography they claimed, occupied, and, well, eventually named.
I love this idea that the map itself is the primary source document.
Hmm.
Okay, let's unpack this and start our virtual map tour at the very beginning. For the listener joining us, if we look at the late 17th century, where does the physical journey of the DuBose family in America begin?
It begins in the Low Country, which, for those maybe unfamiliar with South Carolina geography, means the coastal plain, that flat, often marshy region right next to the Atlantic. Specifically, we start on the banks of the Santee River, one of the state's major waterways. This area, around the 1680s, is the undeniable cradle of the family in America. And this starting point is tied directly to the refugee experience, correct?
Precisely. Isaac DuBose, our progenitor, was a Huguenot, a French Protestant fleeing severe religious persecution after the revocation of the Edict of Nantes. He was granted land here in the 1680s. And this wasn't, a solitary venture. It was part of a larger colonial effort to populate the region. His grant placed him in a small, intentional community of fellow refugees called French Jamestown.
French Jamestown. That name sounds both grand and maybe a bit hopeful. But what was the reality of establishing this French Protestant foothold? And perhaps more importantly, what kind of land was Isaac actually granted on the Santee River? I mean, were these desirable plots?
That's a really critical question. The grant served multiple purposes for the English crown, encouraging settlement, generating economic activity, and critically acting as a buffer zone
A buffer against who?
against the Spanish to the south and often hostile Native American populations further west. Isaac and his contemporaries were often skilled artisans or maybe experienced agriculturalists, which made them attractive settlers, you see. However, the land itself, well, it was an ecological shock. They were dropped into the lowest part of the Low Country. This environment was characterized by dense cypress and tupelo swamps, characterized by these slow-moving tidal creeks that fed into the Santee. The soil, when it wasn't completely saturated, was heavy clay and sand, totally different from the rich farmlands of France. The challenges were just immense. Brutal, humid summers, endemic malaria, and the constant backbreaking work of clearing dense subtropical wilderness.
Wow, it sounds less like a land grant and more like a survival test.
Hmm.
What would that world have looked like, smelled like, felt like to Isaac in the 1680s, just, trying to carve out a living?
It would have been overwhelming, just this landscape of green, heat, and water. Imagine navigating terrain where travel was often easier by shallow boat or canoe than by horse or foot.
Right.
Dealing with insects and animals completely alien to Europe and facing a climate that actively sought to sicken them during the summer months. The focus of that first generation wasn't building wealth, it was sheer subsistence and community cohesion within French Jamestown. Just
Same.
holding on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating here is how quickly they recognize the potential, inherent in that harsh geography. They realize that while the land was difficult to live on, it was uniquely suited for cash crops that demanded standing water.
Ah, okay. You're talking about the agricultural revolution that basically funded the entire colonial South rice cultivation.
Precisely. If we trace the journey from refugee to established citizen, the pivot point is rice. The tidal action of the Santee River system allowed for the construction of these elaborate irrigation systems, rice paddies, which were, engineering marvels of the 18th century. This transition required immense labor, capital, and specialized knowledge. and often the brutal exploitation of enslaved labor to manage those flooded fields.
And that transition is reflected geographically, isn't it? They don't stay right there on the riverbanks near that initial refugee community. Absolutely not. The first generation was focused on basic survival in French Jamestown, but as the family mastered rice and indigo production, turning that punishing geography into profit, the second and third generations acquired far larger, more profitable tracts slightly inland. This led them into St. John's, Berkeley Parish.
St. John's, Berkeley Parish. That sounds like a massive shift, not just in wealth, but in status. It sounds very deliberate, very Anglican, very English. What did that geographic and naming shift really signify?
It was a declaration of status and assimilation. Moving to Berkeley Parish meant aligning with the established Anglican power structure. French Jamestown was the place of refugees. Berkeley Parish was the place of powerful planters.
Right.
This area became the family's social, political, and economic center of gravity. They transitioned from being, foreign Huguenots seeking shelter into foundational members of the colonial elite. They leveraged the geography, those highly productive tidal rice fields, to build generational wealth, cementing their position among the elite. This move wasn't just about finding better land, it was about moving into the heartland of South Carolina's economic and political power structure. A move necessitated and funded, really, by mastering the Low Country's unique, unforgiving environment.
That's a powerful analysis of part one.
Mm.
The land as a source of survival, then as a source of immense wealth. But their story doesn't end in the Low Country. As you mentioned, the history of South Carolina is one of constant movement inland. So by the mid-18th century, where did their story move?
Right. By the time of the Revolutionary era, the narrative shifts toward the Midlands. The Low Country land was finite, it was expensive, and often tied up in primogeniture among the eldest sons.
Oh, okay.
Younger, ambitious sons, like the children of Isaac II, they needed new territory. So the movement was inland into what was then described as the wild frontier known as the Old Cheras District, which today encompasses Darlington County.
The term frontier implies a really radical difference from the, established elegance and infrastructure of Berkeley Parish. What made the Old Cheras District so fundamentally different from their coastal base?
It was a raw, rugged environment, geographically and culturally. Very different. While Berkeley was settled, surveyed, and ruled directly from Charleston, the Cheras District lay further up the Great River systems, the PD and the Lynch's River tributaries. Geographically, it was characterized by high pine barrens interspersed with deep, difficult river swamps. Agriculture was harder, but the land was cheaper and plentiful.
Makes sense.
And crucially, it was a geopolitical frontier. It was less policed, less taxed. Its economy was built on smaller scale provision, farming corn, tobacco, eventually upland cotton, rather than massive rice production. It was a place for, rougher, more independent individuals seeking opportunity outside the restrictive social hierarchy of the coastal elite.
Okay. And it was in this rugged territory that we find perhaps the most direct geographical marker of their power, the introduction of that key landmark, DuBose's Crossing, on the Lynch's River.
Exactly. This is a perfect piece of evidence. The simple name DuBose's Crossing isn't just a geographical fact, it's a statement of local political and economic power.
I sort of picture a shallow, rocky ford where you could simply walk or ride a horse across. But you referred to it as infrastructure. What exactly was DuBose's Crossing?
Yeah, it was much more significant than just a natural ford. It was a commissioned ferry operation run by Captain Peter DuBose. He was one of those ambitious younger sons who moved up to the Midlands. In the 18th century, a functional ferry was, the equivalent of a modern interstate interchange.
That's a powerful analogy. Why was a ferry so vital to the developing commercial life of the Midlands?
Well, consider the geography. The Lynch's River is wide and fast-flowing, especially after rains. To successfully move goods, livestock, people across it required specialized infrastructure, a boat, ropes, landings, and most importantly, a license from the colonial or state government. It gave the operator immense control.
Okay, so if the ferry gave Captain Peter DuBose immense control, what specific legal and commercial powers did he acquire with that license? How did that cement his local prominence?
Well, the power was really threefold. First, economic control. He set the rates, right? Generating instant commerce and revenue, effectively taxing movement across the river. Second, administrative importance. To get the charter, you had to be a respected, stable landowner. The license itself was a formal recognition by the government that he was essential to the region's development.
I see.
And third, information hub. The crossing became the center of local commerce and communication. If you wanted to send or receive information, or even post a notice, you did it at the ferry landing. Peter DuBose controlled the flow of people, goods, and news, making him an instant leader in the Cheras district.
Wow.
The existence of the crossing shows that the family wasn't just farming in the region, they were literally building the infrastructure that defined it.
That's a truly deep dive into the significance of just a single geographic name. And this infrastructure then quickly becomes strategic during the Revolutionary War, right?
Exactly. This newly claimed geography was immediately thrust into military relevance. If we connect this economic geography to the military conflict, we find that the surrounding swamps of the Santee and the PD were the primary theater of operations for General Francis Marion, the legendary Swamp Fox.
Right. Marion's whole strategy was defined by his ability to use that difficult, confusing geography to his advantage against the larger, better-equipped British forces.
Precisely. Marion relied completely on local men who knew the land intimately, and this included Captain Samuel DuBose, who we mentioned in our previous deep dives. He was known for his mastery of these specific creeks and crossings. DuBose's crossing wasn't just a business enterprise, it was a military asset. A local expert like Samuel DuBose could guide Marion's partisans through impossible terrain, coordinating attacks and then disappearing back into the cypress swamps. Conversely, they could destroy infrastructure like ferries to slow the British pursuit. So this transition from peaceful settler to powerful planter and then to Revolutionary War figure is almost entirely determined by the precise location of their land holdings on these vital river systems.
The geography provided both wealth and military cover.
Yeah.
It's remarkable how deeply interconnected those two roles were. Okay, let's move forward in time. As the family solidified their power and grew in prosperity before the Civil War, they reached the peak of their influence. If the Low Country was the origin and the Cheras district was the frontier of opportunity, where were their main centers of life during this antebellum period of peak wealth?
Well, by the 1830s and 1840s, the family heartland had really solidified inland, in the fertile planting districts of Darlington and Kershaw. This was the era of King Cotton. Their wealth was immense, generated by massive enslaved labor forces on large estates. However, even with all their wealth, their lifestyle was still dictated by an unforgiving aspect of South Carolina's climate. And this is where we introduce a fascinating and often misunderstood geographical concept, the story of Springville.
Springville. It sounds pastoral, pleasant. But you mentioned biology and disease. What exactly was Springville, and why was it so vital to the planter class?
Right. Springville was not a working plantation. It was what historians call a summer village. To understand why it existed, you have to understand the ecological horror show that the South Carolina low country and low-lying inland plantations became during the summer.
Help us picture that horror. What was the specific environmental risk?
The risk was disease, specifically malaria and yellow fever, both carried by mosquitoes that bred in standing water. The necessary irrigation for rice in the low country, and even the natural poor drainage of inland plantations created ideal vector habitats. From May through September, these diseases just rampaged, disproportionately affecting the non-immunity, the children, the elderly, and of course the enslaved populations forced to remain on the most dangerous ground.
So it wasn't just uncomfortably hot. The environment was genuinely lethal, especially for the non-acclimated, like you said, children, newcomers.
Precisely. It was a statistical certainty that spending the summer on a low-lying plantation was a gamble with death. Wealthy planter families, including the DuBoses, seasonally fled. They executed a health-driven annual migration.
They literally packed up everything.
Entire households, servants, tutors, clothes, silver, and moved to elevated areas.
And Springville was one of these elevated destinations. What was the critical geographical difference that made Springville healthy?
The key lies in elevation and drainage, even a small difference. Springville was located in the Sandhills region, characterized by deep, sandy soil and higher elevation. This soil drained incredibly quickly, preventing the vast pools of standing water necessary for the Anopheles mosquito life cycle.
Ah, okay.
Moving just a few dozen feet higher and into the dry pine forests fundamentally altered the local ecology of disease transmission.
So they were essentially paying a premium.
Exactly. They were paying a premium to buy health through geography. Their wealth allowed them to maintain 2 residences and move to a location specifically designed to avoid the deadliest months of the year. It was a privilege unavailable to the vast majority of the population, of course.
That's a profound insight into the power and privilege of that era. But this wasn't just a health spa, right? It became a complete social ecosystem. Help us picture how intense life in a place like Springville would have been during those months.
Oh, it was the social epicenter of the district. Imagine the contrast. On the plantation, life was isolated, focused on production, marked by constant managerial strain, and, well, Greenville, life was concentrated and geared towards social connection and leisure.
Hmm.
These villages weren't permanent cities, mind you. They were rows of simple, unpainted cottages or small functional homes designed for seasonal occupancy, not grandeur. But within those structures, the district's elite, the Retts, the Witherspoons, the DuBoses, were concentrated for 4 to 5 months.
I can just imagine the intensity of that constant interaction. It must have been the place where all the district's real decisions were made behind the scenes.
Absolutely. The social calendar was relentless. There were parties, balls, sermons, political meetings. Marriages were arranged, debts were settled, local political strategy was finalized here, far away from the heat and isolation of the plantation. The village became the unofficial seat of power for the antebellum planter aristocracy. It reinforced the class structure dramatically because who was present in Springville and who was forced to remain in the malarial lowlands defined the hierarchy of the South Carolina elite.
Yeah?
The seasonal rhythm dictated their entire year. Springville and others like it were essential not just for physical survival, but for the preservation of their social identity and their political control. The geography, once again, was instrumental. This time, it was used as a shield against the biological reality of the South.
It's incredible how the need for survival dictates such sophisticated social engineering. From the coastal grant to the elevated village, the DuBose story is defined by this constant geographical adaptation. So we've covered nearly 200 years of movement across the map. If a descendant or just an interested visitor were to take this tour today, what tangible remnants of this deep history can they still find on the ground? I mean, so much of the old architecture and economic structure must have vanished.
It is true that the grand houses and the economic engine of the plantation era are largely gone, victims of war, fire, or just time. But the history endures in several powerful, tangible forms. A great starting point would be the historical markers established by the state and local societies. For instance, the marker at the original location of DuBose's crossing on the Lynches River is a direct link. It often contains snippets of the Revolutionary War history or the commercial importance of the ferry landing. These markers are immovable, acting as permanent signposts in the landscape.
Okay. And beyond official history, what provides that direct physical connection,
Yeah.
sort of personal link?
Sacred ground, the family cemeteries.
Aye, yes.
These small enclosed plots, often shaded by ancient oaks or pines, are the ultimate enduring testament to a family claiming a piece of geography forever. You can still find and visit the burial site of Captain Samuel DuBose, for example. These cemeteries are anchors. They represent land that was set aside from agricultural use, sanctified and intentionally maintained, providing a physical, unbroken link to the ancestors. When the houses fall and the fields are repurposed, these small plots are what remain, silently testifying to generations of presence and commitment to that soil.
That raises a kind of philosophical question that feels central to this deep dive. If the houses are gone, if the plantation economy has vanished, how does the history remain? Does the land itself hold the memory?
Absolutely, I believe it does. While the physical evidence of the architecture is often gone, the permanence of the history endures in the names on the land.
The names.
Yeah.
Right, the legacy written into the very cartography.
Exactly. Look at a detailed map of Darlington or Kershaw County today. You will still find creeks, roads, maybe local neighborhoods bearing the DuBose name. This is where the initial source material, names in South Carolina, is so powerful. These aren't ephemeral signs or faded paint on an old building. They are baked into the state's cartography. Creek X flows through a piece of land first claimed by Isaac, and so it takes his name. Road Y leads to the old crossing, so it's named after the family that ran the ferry. When the first Isaac received that grant on the Santee in the 1680s, the goal was not just to farm it, but to claim it, to tame it, and, well, to define it. Every time a contemporary mapmaker draws a line and labels it with that name, that original claim is, in a way, renewed.
It's like a silent echo, a geographical memory that transcends mortar and timber, signifying that for generations, this family was a force in defining and developing that particular corner of South Carolina. The places themselves bear the legacy.
That's the ultimate takeaway, I think. The history is permanent because the geography is permanent. The names testify to their influence over centuries. From the refugee struggle to the establishment of vast wealth to the creation of vital infrastructure. The land remembers.
This has been a truly comprehensive deep dive, guiding us from those harsh tidal creeks of the Santee, through the strategic center of DuBose's Crossing, and up to the vital, elevated summer village of Springville. The DuBose family story is literally written across the map of South Carolina.
It really is an affirmation of the central role of geography. From the low country where the first refugees struggled for survival, to the Midlands where the elite sought refuge from the disease that their own agricultural wealth generated. The geography of the state is a silent witness to their entire journey. The names on the land are the enduring physical legacy.
Thank you for guiding us through this geographical history. This has been absolutely fascinating, and it gives us so much to reflect on. For you, the listener, we leave you with this final thought to explore. Consider the difference between land that is merely occupied and land that is named. How does the act of attaching a family name to a river or a crossroad solidify a claim to history in a way that building a house perhaps never could? Join us next time as we shift our focus again and explore the stories of the people whose labor built these plantations and created the wealth of the antebellum South, the invisible foundation upon which all these geographical claims were ultimately built. We're calling that deep dive the invisible foundation.